Okay.
So you're off to the War Museum next?
We were trying to. We're going to end up filming here because we couldn't get to the War Museum because of all the prep they're doing for Remembrance Day.
Uh-huh.
Okay, where's my Zoom?
See, it's Monday. Live. It's Manic Monday.
I know we're live, but I can't open you. There we go. All right. I think we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Command Post. We are live on location today in Ottawa. And we have with us today Monica Bobbit, our very special friend from A Goat Rodeo. We've measured our chairs, so we are 6 feet apart. We're being safe in this COVID world. And today we're going to be talking to everybody about Remembrance Day and the importance of Remembrance Day and what it means to those of us in Canada. So I have Monica with us today. Monica, how are you?
I'm good.
Is that a loaded question in the COVID world?
So right Stephanie, you have to tell them that I've just had the most wild, crazy drive-in from Stittsville to the city that I've ever had. And so I'm just trying to decompress in my chair.
Monica needs a drink.
I need gin in my
water.
You need gin. But it's
hang on. No, Rick didn't put this up. Sorry.
Come on, Rick. Where's the gin?
Come on, Rick. Next time we need the gin. God, you're failing us.
Yeah, he is, but it's okay.
So, this is your second time joining us today, so thank you so much. You've been such a.
I feel like we should be in the bathroom, but
we should. I mean,
but there's not
COVID,
enough room,
right? Like it'd be weird if we were both in the bathtub at this point.
Yeah,
and it's only a standing shower in there, so not as comfortable.
It's not going to work.
But tell it, for those who haven't met you yet, tell us a little bit about your military family, how you became a military family, and sort of what got you here to today.
So I was in high school and I met this really cute guy with this really impish grin and ended up dating him, and he was in the reserves at the time. So we graduated high school together, went to university, went to the same university, and partway through our first year, he got accepted into the regular officer training program. And
where in Canada were you?
We were in Wolfville, Nova Scotia at Acadia University, and he had the option to redo his first year at RMC and do his 4 years at the Royal Military College, and he said, forget it, and he stayed. And so we did 4 years at university together, and then we graduated. He went off to do his first phase training as an officer and came back after phase 3, and 2 days later we got married. And that was in August 1993. And we had I haven't counted in a while, but I think we had 8 postings.
8 postings?
Yeah, I think we had 8 postings, 9 moves because we did an interbase move on one of our postings. And then we were just 4 months shy of our 21st anniversary. We were posted in Petawawa. He was commanding officer of the 2nd Regiment Royal Canadian Horse Artillery. And he was in Wainwright on an exercise Maple Resolve. They run it every April, May. It's the Canadian Army's biggest exercise. And unfortunately, he was killed when his lab rolled over at the bottom of a hill. And that was in May 21st, 2014.
2014. So we're going on 7 years here.
Yeah, we're in our 7th year.
Crazy. So, I mean, with Remembrance Day coming up, this has to be a really meaningful time for you. What does Remembrance Day mean for an individual who had, because I think Remembrance Day means something to just sort of the average civilian. And I think actually there's a lot of education that needs to happen, but what does it mean for somebody who's actually lost somebody in service?
Well, I think, even as a military spouse, Remembrance Day was always very significant for us. It was a time for us to stop and reflect, to think of those that were lost, and to be, as a spouse, I was grateful that my husband was still with us, and we would think of those that we knew that didn't come home, and we would think of their families, and it was always a bit heavy, but that paled in comparison to how heavy it became after I actually became one of the widows. And I remember, I would stand at the cenotaph and I would think about all the widows, and, growing up, it was World War, you would think of the widows and families from World War One and World War Two in Korea. We even had some Canadians who went to Vietnam, and it doesn't even occur to you that someday you are going to be one of them.
Right.
It's very humbling.
And what do you and your kids do to kind of honor the day? Or maybe the other question is this day more meaningful than others? Because I would imagine there are many occasions where.
So I don't ever presume to speak for all military widows or families of the fallen. This is our family. This is our story. For us, every day is Remembrance Day. It never goes away. Right. And I think that's the important thing that Canadians need to know, because I think you think about, there's a lot of attention paid, and we're great for support after there's been an incident like we had a couple of weeks ago where we lost a soldier, and in the spring when we lost, the helicopter crash in Europe, we lost the 6, and then we lost the PAFO from the snowbird, and there's a lot of support and a lot of attention paid to that, but I think that fades quickly.
Right.
And it leaves everyday thought, because people naturally they go back to their own lives, but for families like mine, it never goes away. And and we do, a lot of us do say every day is Remembrance Day, and yes, in some aspects Remembrance Day is harder because you go through, ceremonies of like Remembrance Day are very similar to military funerals. You have the last post and the reveille, and a lot of times you'll have, prayers and hymns, and it very much brings that back to the forefront.
Just gonna move that so that people can see you.
But it's the other days too, right? And a lot of people have gone through this with COVID, lost celebrations with their families and stuff. Well, my kids, all 3 of them graduated high school, and their dad wasn't there to see it. Our son joined the military. His dad wasn't there to see it. I have a picture of my husband and his father, my late husband and his father in uniform together. My son will never have that with his dad. And so it's all the big momentous occasions, but it's all the little ones in between that they miss it on too, right? And we always will have that, empty seat at the dining room table, and many of us move on and move forward. You don't move on, but you move forward with your life, and some get remarried or have new relationships, but you still have that piece that's always going to be gone.
Right. With Corporal James Choi having an accident in Wainwright, and being, of some similarity to your husband's accident, do you find that triggering?
I do. I find that does activate. The location will do it, but also if it's another lab rollover, that I find that particularly difficult. And a couple of years after Dan died, we did have another lab rollover in Wainwright, and a soldier died, and that one hit me really hard. It was the first lab rollover where somebody was killed since Dan. So of course Dan's picture was on the news again, and they brought it up, and I'm very, very fortunate. I have a fabulous support network, through my peers and my friends and my military community, but also the regiment is fantastic. They're very supportive, and the Padre and I, he's no longer the Padre at that unit, but we have an incredible bond, and he's been very good, and he reaches out to me whenever there's a particular incident or whatever, but he was able to contact me just before it hit the media, so I was able to prepare myself and to prepare our 3 kids, because it was the first significant accident that had so many similarities to their dads. And, within 5 minutes of him telling me, it was on the news and his picture was there. So you have to prepare yourself for that, because that takes you back, and then you relive it. And whenever somebody dies, you relive that, right? You you can picture in your mind what the families are going through, you know what the notification process is like, you know what all the steps are gonna be, and and you just know how difficult it is, and you know how excruciatingly painful it is, and you never want anybody to ever have to feel the same kind of pain that you do.
Is there something in you that feels the need to reach out to other families?
Oh,
that happens?
absolutely.
Or do families who have lost other members typically reach out?
It's both. You know, the accident in April, you know, I was able to reach out to some people directly and also to some friends that I knew of some of the people who died. My son went to RMC with Abigail, so he knew Abigail. So, you know, that was a significant loss for their peer group as well. So, you know, you try and you make your contact available and you say, you know, if you don't want to be intrusive either, because you know, I mean, that's one thing you do know, you learn intimately, is how overwhelming it is. And I remember the night Dan died, somebody showed up at my house and I had no idea who they were. Well, they were the daughter of a friend of Dan's parents, but I'd never met her before. She was a complete stranger to me, and it was just overwhelming.
Right.
Because there were so many other people there. You know, I hadn't met the Padre before. I hadn't met, you know, so there's all these people that you already have to deal with that you don't know, that have to be a part of the process, and then you have all these people, you know, and it's people,
Well-meaning.
it's always well-intentioned, it's their natural inclination to reach out, but it's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I try to, you know, I'll send a brief note, and I'm very mindful of the fact that the attention does die down and the support does sometimes ease. So I tend to wait to reach out directly also, you know, so 6 months or 8 months or 12 months, because I say, you know, people don't realize long after the casseroles have gone moldy and the flowers have wilted, the grief is still there, and you're still learning to adapt, and you're still trying to figure out how to put your life back together and how to incorporate your loss into your life and how to move forward with that. So
I'm curious, thinking about Remembrance Day, before Dan had passed, had he lost any friends?
He had lost 2 members of his regiment, one, not of 2 horse directly, but 2 artillery members. Nicola Goddard was one of his students, so he knew her well. And then Jeff Francis was Dan's forward observation officer. He was doing the same job that Nicola was doing on Dan's tour, actually. And he died while Dan and I were in England with our children on his leave. And I remember the moment the phone call came, and I can tell you, Stephanie, it's the only time Dan and I were together for 25 years when he died, and it was the one and only time I ever saw him cry. It was just, it buckled his knees, and he was devastated, and he felt a lot of guilt because he hadn't been there when it happened. And if he'd been there, there was nothing he could have done any differently to have prevented what happened, but it was just that sense of responsibility because he was the battery commander and he wasn't there when it happened.
So I'm curious, and I know that you'll comment only from your experience, that you don't speak for everybody, but you know, we talk about family members who've lost somebody, and we talk about serving members who've lost somebody.
Yeah.
Do you find in your travels, do you find that the serving member who's lost somebody and the families, they grieve differently? Are serving members as open? Do they talk with their families about what they might be feeling?
Well, I think the thing you have to realize is that everybody grieves differently, right? I mean, that's just the way humans are. We all have different personalities, we have different traits, we have different, we've been brought up to deal with death in different ways, we have different comfort levels in expressing it. I think, you know, military members in particular tend to be more stoic, they tend to be, you know, they tend to internalize it more. I think we've come a long way in the last 20 years in our ability and, you know, in the way we approach grief and how we talk about it. And I think, you know, we're much more open, and certainly the serving members that I know, they're much more open in speaking about it than they were 20 years ago. Are they as open as I am? Some of them are, some of them aren't. Some of them feel, they feel that they can share that load with their family. Some of them don't talk to their family about it. It's just everybody's different. Certainly Dan never really spoke a lot about, he was, he and it was interesting because he was a very open person. He was very, you could talk to him about everything, but that was one thing that he was very quiet about was his grief. It wasn't something that we discussed a lot. And we didn't really discuss his tour in Afghanistan a lot. I mean, there was some incidents that he would talk to me about, and there were other ones that he felt that he needed to protect me from. So
do you think that when you talk about serving members being a bit more stoic and internalizing their grief, how does that affect mental health? I mean, is there a way for them to process through it and have it not affect them? Or is it just sort of anybody who's in service, it's innately going to now affect them in terms of their mental health?
Well, I don't believe that at all. No, I think it's like anything. Some people will develop PTSD and some won't. I mean, it's just,
I just mean on a spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. But I think there's some people certainly will not process their grief properly, and they will suffer the effects of that. And I say this all the time, you can't outrun grief. You can't bury it, you can't hide it, you can't, until you acknowledge it and process it and lean into it, it will always impact your life. Some people are able to work through their grief and to pick up the pieces and move on and not have it be debilitating, and other people aren't. And that's everybody. That's not just service members at all. But, certainly service members, due to the nature of their experiences, combat training exercises, high stress, they do tend to sometimes have a more difficulty dealing with their grief, particularly if they've lost somebody while they've been, deployed. Like, and I think, the people in Dan's regiment, certainly, they were on exercise and they had an operational pause for 24 hours, and then they had to pick up and carry back on the exercise. And they didn't really have the time at that. So their grieving process was delayed.
Right.
So, which was one of the reasons why we had Dan's funeral a week after the accident. And then a month later, almost to the day, actually, we had another memorial service for when the rest of the regiment and the brigade returned from Wainwright, because a funeral is a very significant event, and for many, it's one of the first steps in acknowledging the death and being able to, it's in a culture that tends to stigmatize grief as a taboo topic, and you don't openly talk about it, but it's socially acceptable to grieve openly at a funeral.
Right.
So that ritual is
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah. I'm getting some questions in here, actually. Rick is monitoring our social feed. I have a question here that says, are there particular coping mechanisms that you find to be helpful for you that perhaps you didn't have at the onset?
Oh, certainly. For me, writing became one of my it became a very important part of my ability to process my grief and to figure my life out and to deal with all my emotions. And it wasn't, I've always been a talker, and I was able to talk a lot about Dan and what happened, but I wasn't able to really express or to articulate how I was really feeling. But I could do that in words. I can do that in written words when I couldn't necessarily do it in spoken words, because I found it hard at first to get the emotions out verbally. The other thing that became very important for me is coping, and it's one I still fall back on now, is exercise. It was my salvation.
Really?
And it was. And I wasn't the fittest person when Dan died. I had just started to try to run again before he died, and it just, it was my mid-40s, and I felt very stuck that way. And then I started walking the dog because I was overwhelmed, because, in the first, especially when you're trying to plan a funeral and you're trying to do all the paperwork, and I don't think people really they don't really know how much paperwork comes with death.
Right.
And I mean, and there is an entire business side of death that I had no comprehension of how difficult that was and how much work that entailed until it happened. And so it was constant. And my in-laws stayed at the house with me for 6 weeks, and the kids were there, and all these people were coming and going, and then people came for the funeral, and then other people came for the memorial service, and it was overwhelming. So and we were, you know, in a split level 1,200 square feet bungalow, so there was no space, and all these beautiful flower arrangements kept showing up at the house, and like we ran out of places to put them, and the house started to smell like a funeral parlor, and it just was so overwhelming. So I would go for a walk for, you know, like at first I could manage 10 minutes, but it was just 10 minutes by myself.
Right.
And I felt, you know, and especially the first couple of weeks when you're so caught up in how much stuff you have to do and the planning and stuff, you don't really have I felt like I just felt like
did you even process all of it?
no, you're in shock.
Right.
You're not processing it. And I just, you know, I remember I wouldn't cry during the day, but I would fall in bed and I would cry at night because I just didn't have time to sit and cry during the day. There was just too much to do. So I would take these breaks and I would go for 10 minutes outside, and I would be able to cry, and I could just leave it for 10 minutes. And I think that's important. I think you need to put the grief, that all of that stuff, you have to put it aside for just little periods of time, because nobody can handle that 24/7.
Right. You know, we've had 3 tragic incidents this year. We had the cyclone crash in April, and then our snowbird in May, and now with Corporal Choi, and now with COVID. Does Remembrance Day look different this year?
Oh, absolutely, because we can't gather together. You know, it's interesting because this was going to be the first year that I was going to go to the National Military Cemetery for the service. It's not something that I've been able to do yet. And at the National Military Service,
as in you couldn't bring yourself to go,
it was too heavy.
Okay.
So I would go to services in other locations in the city, but I haven't made it to that one yet. I find some.
I have to fix your glare one more time. I apologize.
There it is. I can see it. You know, I find that, you know, some people find great comfort in the, I'm gonna find you, cemetery.
Sorry, Monica.
No, that's okay. Some people get great comfort in going to the cemetery. I was never one of those people. So Dan's was cremated, and we divided his ashes, which is, we divided them and we buried half of them at Beechwood. They're interred there, and then the other half are in Nova Scotia. And I've been to his grave in Nova Scotia, but I hadn't been to the one in Ottawa since the day he was buried there, and that was where we had the big military funeral. And I found it a lot heavier there because the weight of it, and it was the weight of, you know, it wasn't just grieving Dan, the person, and the husband and the father. It was grieving Dan, the commanding officer, and, you know, I could feel the regiment's grief and everybody else's grief there, and I found it very difficult. And so I finally went back a few months after I moved here, and, you know, it was overwhelming, but it was necessary, and I've been back actually several times since, and each time it gets a little bit easier. And, you know, when I can go to Beechwood now, and I can stand there and I can look at all of these headstones, and they're all uniform.
Right.
And they're all perfectly symmetrical, and it's a beautiful, peaceful, serene place, and I can stand there and I can feel more gratitude than sorrow. And so this year I thought, you know what, I think
What brought the shift? What brought the shift from sorrow to gratitude?
I think you know, I don't want to say time. I think it's just where I'm at in my journey. And, you know, acceptance is so important when you've suffered a loss, and it's not just the initial acceptance that they're gone, that they've died, but it's acceptance is a continuous process. And and I think as you heal, you're able to face that acceptance in a different way than you would have initially.
So with Remembrance Day looking so different this year for families out there that take this time to grieve, what are they doing? How are military families coping this year without that sense of community, without those gatherings?
So I think we all kind of lean on each other. Many of us still, speaking particularly of my situation, part of the reason I came back to Ottawa was because of my military community. And I still have many friends
about that for you.
In the community, and I had a message yesterday from somebody who's an acquaintance, not a close friend, but I'm just thinking of you. And it's that kind of stuff that's significant, right? And I think that's important. And to know that I belong to the Canadian Military Wives Choir in Ottawa. I was able to join that, and we just did. We normally would sing at a Remembrance Day service, but because we can't do that this year, we did a virtual presentation, and it was beautiful. Our choir director Allison did it, and she did a fabulous job. And everybody, some of the people contributed voices where they they spoke a poem this year instead of singing, and some of us contributed pictures, some did artwork. So Dan's picture was included in the tribute, and it's things like that are significant. And
I have a question coming in here about your community. Do you still have relationships with other spouses or families from when Dan was active?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're my closest friends. They still are. Yeah. So, I would be lost without them. Yes. So Dan's best friend and his wife live 10 minutes away from me. So, so I have them. I have, my own personal friends that were, and it's interesting because a lot of my military friends, my closest ones are, their spouses were also artillery, because we're such a small group, and we're posted and we're together. And my best friend used to work with Dan. So yeah, no, absolutely, I still do, and it's fabulous.
That's
yeah,
really nice.
Yeah, and then of course, since I moved back to Ottawa and joined the choir, I've met a whole bunch of other, military spouses and whose husbands Dan didn't work with or didn't know. So it's I have a very active community.
That's wonderful. I want to think about Remembrance Day sort of big picture right now. How do you think Remembrance Day, I have thoughts on this, but how do you think Remembrance Day resonates with the general population? What are the thoughts of an average civilian?
Geez, I don't know, because it's been a long time since I've thought like that. I think Canadians are very cognizant of the sacrifice and the selflessness of their service members. I think they're very appreciative and grateful. For the most part, I mean, there are some people that just don't get it, and they probably never will, but I think very much so. I mean, I don't, I certainly see that. I saw that.
Do you find there's a disconnect in terms of everybody thinking Remembrance Day is about sort of like Grandpa's War,
I do. And one thing I find, and I think this is particularly to me, this resonates with me, is because, people think of Remembrance Day and they think of soldiers who died in battle. Right. So they think, because it was World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, until we went into Afghanistan. I mean, we did lose some in Eastern Europe in the 90s, but you always heard about the big ones. And even now, when people think about our lost soldiers, it's automatically like, and this happens to me on a regular basis. People will ask me how my husband died, civilians, and or it'll come up that I'm a widow and my husband was in the military, and they'll say, well, how did he die? Afghanistan? And I'm like, no. Suicide? No. Right. And then I'll say, well, he was killed in a lab rollover, and they look at me and they're almost like perplexed. And
Right.
sometimes I almost feel like they're disappointed, like it's not exciting enough that he died in a lab rollover. So I think it's really important. And I mean, particularly, I mean, over the last several years since Dan died, most of our service personnel that have died in training
In training,
accidents.
yeah.
And that's really important. And I thought it was really significant. Our Silver Cross mother this year, her son was Deborah Sullivan, I believe her name is. Her son was killed on a submarine in 2004 in a fire. The submarine was coming back to Canada from Scotland, and he died in that. And I think that's important that we recognize that, you know, military service is dangerous.
Yes.
And it doesn't just happen in Afghanistan or Iraq or you know, in Flanders Fields or any of those places. It happens here too.
Right.
And
we have this inherent risk.
Absolutely, and we have to be mindful of that. And I think the thing that people have to realize is, you know, a service member dies in Afghanistan or a service member dies in Wainwright, those deaths still change those families' lives forever.
Yes.
You know, now, will the grieving process be the same? Will the mechanism be of course not, because we're all different and we're all unique and we all have different, and there's always going to be different layers of grief. But it still is and it's as devastating to their colleagues,
Yes.
no matter where they die.
Right. I have another question coming in here. Is there a community for Memorial Cross families in Canada? That's a loaded question.
Yes. So out west, there's a more active Memorial Cross community. I have a great group of widows. We have our own little group that, you know, that some of them had started before I came along, and they're fantastic at welcoming. And it's not a group any of us wants to belong to by any means, but they reach out whenever they are made aware of somebody's loss, but we don't have the same kind of community support. I mean, we have our own individual support, but in the United States, they have the very organized tragedies survivor assistance program. We don't have that in Canada.
Right.
So we have the HOPE program was developed, and that provides one-on-one support for parents and spouses, but there's no support provided for children under 18.
Tell us what the HOPE program is.
So the HOPE program was organized as, you know, kind of a peer support program for families of the fallen. And so a widow would be paired with another widow, a parent with a parent. And some people become very active in that, other people don't,
Right.
you know. So I had an unfortunate experience with it, so it's not something that I'm a part of. But that's it. Like, we don't have access. We don't know all the names of all the other people. There's no database that we have access to because of confidentiality and stuff. So it's very piecemeal. We kind of find each other.
I'm hearing a lot in the community now when we're talking about grief, or we're talking about injuries, or you know, we talk about support, peer support groups,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this idea of compassion fatigue. And how sometimes that can be very difficult to be
Mhm.
part of that peer program, because you're dealing with your own grief so
Yeah.
much that it might be difficult to mentor somebody else through that. Are there actual programs or clinical programs that help families, whether it's a widow or a spouse or children or parents, for mental health support in terms of how to sort of work through, navigate the grief?
So again, it's very piecemeal. Some of the MFRCs have offered grief programs, some of them haven't. It just depends. I've never been able to participate in one. I know some people have had access to a couple, so it's hit or miss. There's no organized every year we're gonna have this grief support
Right.
program for the families or for the children, or, you know, so there's not a lot of cohesion in what resources are available. We do have access through the Family and Morale phone service to counseling. Some people go through Veterans Affairs for counseling,
Right.
but there's no one organized, okay, every year there's gonna be this program that
Right.
you can access. It's just not there.
Now, before we finish, because I have a couple more questions for you, but I can't, it's flown by. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, because what I find so unbelievable about you is that you have been able to take your grief and you've turned it into something so positive for other individuals. You touch so many individuals, whether it's from your blog or whether it's from your Facebook page, or you've built up this incredible following. You're clearly resonating with so many people. Tell us what it is that you're doing and what you're trying, what your goal is.
So when I first started, I personally knew one widow who was my own age, but I hadn't seen her for years, and I hadn't spoken to her. When I knew her, I knew she was a widow, but I didn't speak to her about it. And then when I was widowed, I felt like I was very much on my own because I didn't know anybody my own age. I didn't have that group yet. And I quickly realized that grief was not a topic that we did well.
Yeah.
Death is not a topic we do well.
As
As in Canadian society in general, but it's particularly in the military community. It's not something that we talk about, and I needed to talk.
Right.
I needed to read, needed to write, I needed to talk, I needed to express how I was feeling. And then as I went through the process, I realized that we have all these stereotypical ideas of what grief looks like and what widowhood looks like. And, I felt that somebody needed to say, wait a minute,
Right.
It doesn't have to be that way. I can mourn the loss of my husband and be sad that he's gone, but still build a fantastic life for myself. And that's the duality of loss. And this is how I'm going to figure out how to do it. And I realized that, we just don't talk about grief enough. And grief impacts us so much in our lives. And particularly in military communities, yes, we deal with death more often than some communities do, but we also deal with grief when we are posted and we leave our community behind. And, you've had a wonderful posting with these wonderful friends and you have to pick up and leave them. We deal with grief when there's an injury and a career is derailed. We deal with grief when we have a career that we have to give up to follow. So, I felt that it was very important that we need to openly acknowledge and talk about grief and what it is. Mm-hmm. And so I just started talking, and I didn't, when I started, when I first started it was for me to help me process it.
Right.
And then with the encouragement of my wonderful Padre Ray, he's like, you need to talk to soldiers about this. And I'm like, the soldiers don't want to hear. Like, why do they want to hear me talk? And he's like, trust me, they want to hear you talk. And he was the first one. He brought me back to Petawawa. I was in Nova Scotia at the time. I went back to Petawawa. And here I am, this little artillery CO's widow, standing in front of like 600 infanteers, talking to them. And I didn't it was the first time ever I did that. And I was like, this is going to be interesting. And we divided into segments. And the first half, they were kind of quiet. They weren't sure if they should laugh because widows have a really bizarre sense of humor, a lot of them. And then by the second segment in the afternoon, they were lined up to talk to me afterwards because they just need it. And I think that's the important thing. You need to give people, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to cry. It's okay to say this sucks. It's okay to feel what you feel. And it's okay to move forward. And somebody needs to be able to say that.
You're saying it loud and clear, and I think people are hearing your message. So bravo. My last question really is what can Canadians do to show that they're honoring our fallen military members and supporting our Canadian military families during this time? When I speak to so many military families, it just seems to me that this time right before Remembrance Day seems very heavy to them. What can we do as Canadian citizens to show our support?
Well, I think the important thing for me, I spent a couple of years working at the Legion after my husband died, and there was a lot of older vets there, and I spent a lot of time talking to them and working with them, and I don't think people realize the significance of the poppy. It's not just a tangible reminder of what we've lost and what they've given, but it's also the funds from the Poppy Fund go to support veterans. It goes to support, if you have a veteran who needs a wheelchair, that's where the money comes from, right? And it's, scholarships for kids like mine, right? And I think, and I adopted this idea. One of my favorite vets was he was 92 at the time, and he wanted people to visit the graves. And I think that's one thing, and that's one thing I encourage Canadians to do. In every cemetery in Canada, you will find a veteran. Right. You will find a veteran buried. And go and read their names and, leave your poppy there. Or, my kids and I would go to the cemetery that Dan was buried in Nova Scotia, this small town cemetery, and there were like 50 vets there. And we would go on Flag Day in February, and we would take flags. We would go on Canada Day and take flags. We would take poppies, and at Christmas one year we took wreaths to them all, and we visited them, and we read the names and research the history and teach your kids that, and there's all kinds of other veterans organizations that you can donate to. Soldier On, Wounded Warrior, simple things. Write a card to a soldier's deployed. Write a card to a veteran. There's veteran, drop it off at the Legion or at the Veterans Hospital. I mean, there's so many things that you can do to reach out. And if you personally know somebody who's lost someone, send them a note. Just tell them you're thinking of them. Drop them off a cup of coffee. I mean, it's harder in the age of COVID, but you can still do it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you.
This has
just flown by. So this has been so tremendous. Thank you for everything you do. You're just a tremendous human being. You know how much I love you, and you're such a great friend.
Well, I love you too, Stephanie. So it's good. I have our little mutual love.
You're such a great friend who Together We Stand, and we thank you for everything that you do. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. If you have any questions, you can leave them for Monica at our link on Facebook. And we will see you all November 23rd on our next command post when we speak to several individuals about operational stress injuries. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Monica.
Thank you for having me.